They tell you it's an honor, that you'll serve the Emperor forever. What they don't tell you is that forever means waking up once every 100 years, just long enough to kill, and then going back into the dark. You won't age, you won't die. You'll just disappear for decades at a time while the world moves on without you. So ask yourself this: if you can't remember who you were, are you even still alive? I woke to the smell of burning incense and the mechanical hum of my own heartbeat. That first awakening was not gentle, nor was it the sudden clarity of a man pulled from drowning. It was the slow ignition of something that had been extinguished, a coal nursing itself back into reluctant flame. I did not open my eyes because I had no eyes to open. I did not draw breath because my lungs had been seared to ash on a battlefield whose name I could no longer recall. What returned to me was not consciousness in any human sense, but rather the cold flicker of awareness threaded through systems I did not yet understand, woven into the metal that had become my skin, my bones, my prison. The first sensation was weight. Not the weight of armor, which I had worn for decades as a brother of the Adeptus Astartes, but a different magnitude entirely. It was as though I had become the anchor of a ship, sunk deep into ocean floor, pressing down upon the bedrock of the world itself. Every slight adjustment of balance required the cooperation of hydraulic joints and servo motors that groaned with the patience of cathedral machinery. I could feel them, these mechanical sinews, responding to thoughts I had not yet fully formed. The body I inhabited was vast, towering, enshrined in ceramite plating and blessed oils. I knew, even before the tech priest spoke to me, that I was no longer Caldus Vaughan, brother sergeant of the 4th Company. I was something they would call venerable. The chamber around me resolved slowly, rendered not through sight but through augers and auspex feeds that painted the world in overlapping spectrums of thermal signature, motion tracking, and structural density. I saw the vaulted ceiling of the reclusium in heat gradients and electromagnetic fields. I saw the tech priests as clusters of bio-readings and sacred circuitry, their flesh parts dim and their augmetics bright. I saw the candles as thermal blooms, the incense as particulate drift. The world had become data, and I was drowning in its cold precision. A voice reached me through external vox grills. "Brother Sergeant Vaughan," it intoned, layered with the mechanical distortion of a voxcaster and the reverent cadence of high Gothic liturgy. "You have been returned to us by the grace of the Emperor and the skill of the Omnissiah's servants. Your sacrifice has been honored. Your service continues." I tried to speak and heard only the grinding of vox speakers warming to operational status. When my voice finally emerged, it was not my own. It was a deep, resonant boom, edged with static and the faint echo of feedback loops. The sound filled the chamber like the tolling of a great bell. What has happened to me? The question felt absurd even as I spoke it, because I already knew. The knowledge was there, waiting in the periphery of my thoughts like a truth I had always understood but never dared to name. I had been broken beyond the capacity of even Astartes' physiology to repair. I had been judged too valuable to let die. I had been entombed. The tech priest who had spoken stepped closer, his robes trailing across the stone floor, his mechadendrites folding and unfolding in ritualistic patterns. He raised a hand to touch the sarcophagus plating that now formed my torso, my chest, my heart. "You are Caldus Vaughan, brother sergeant, first of your name to be interred within the contemptor pattern Dreadnought unyielding wrath. You fell at the siege of Vorton's Gate, holding the eastern breach against the traitor warband known as the Ebon Scythe. Your body was destroyed, your gene seed was recovered. Your mind, your will, your soul endures. You have been given the Emperor's greatest gift. You will walk again. You will fight again. You will never die. Never die." The words settled over me like ash. I tried to move and felt the vast machinery of my new body respond. Actuators hissed, gyros stabilized. My right arm, no longer flesh but a massive power fist encased in ornate plating, rose before what I understood to be my visual feed. I watched it move, smooth and terrible, each finger tipped with adamantium claws capable of shearing through tank armor. It obeyed me perfectly. It felt like nothing at all. "How long?" I asked. The tech priest tilted his head, his augmetic eye clicking through focal adjustments. "Since your internment?" 73 days, 12 hours, 9 minutes. The sanctification rites were extensive, the integration delicate. "You are the 5th Dreadnought to walk among the 4th Company, and the first to be interred within a Contemptor chassis in 11 centuries. You are relic and warrior both, Brother Sergeant. You are a living monument to the chapter's endurance." 73 days. It felt like 73 seconds. It felt like 73 years. I had no frame of reference anymore, no internal rhythm by which to measure time's passage. I had been aware for perhaps 10 minutes, and already I felt the edges of that awareness fraying, growing thin and brittle. Without the constant input of sensation, without hunger or thirst or fatigue, time became something slippery, unreliable, a river that flowed without banks. I looked down at myself, or rather, I directed my sensor arrays downward and saw the sarcophagus that now formed my core. It was engraved with prayers in microscript, sealed with purity seals older than some imperial worlds, draped in chains from which hung the honor marks of campaigns I had fought as a living man. My legs were columnar, each one thick as a promethium barrel, ending in mag-locked feet that could anchor me against the recoil of weapons designed to destroy fortifications. My left arm mounted an assault cannon, its barrels gleaming, its feed mechanism trailing back into internal ammunition hoppers that hummed with readiness. I was a weapon. I was a shrine. I was a tomb that could walk. The tech priest continued his recitation, though I barely heard him. He spoke of system diagnostics and spiritual alignments, of the sacred unguent applied to my joints and the hymns sung over my reactor core. He spoke of the chapter master's blessing and the chaplain's rites. He spoke of glory. All I felt was the silence. Not the silence of the chamber, which rang with the low thrum of machinery and the whispered prayers of servitors, but the silence inside myself. The place where breath should have been, where heartbeat should have pulsed, where blood should have moved warm and necessary through veins. All of it gone, replaced by the steady throb of plasma conduits and the whir of coolant pumps. I was alive, they told me. I was blessed. I felt dead. The first movement they allowed me was supervised, measured, almost ceremonial. Tech priests flanked me on either side as I took a single step forward, the reclusium floor trembling beneath my weight. 14 tons of armor, weapons, and holy machinery moving as one. The step was perfect, balanced, utterly controlled. I felt nothing. No strain in muscles, no shift of weight from heel to ball of foot, no proprioceptive feedback that told me where my body ended and the world began. I simply issued the command, and the body obeyed. Another step. Another. By the 10th step, I had crossed the chamber, and the tech priests were murmuring their approval, making notations on data slates, praising the Omnissiah for the success of the integration. I stood at the far end of the reclusium, facing a wall inscribed with the names of the fallen, and I searched for my own name among them. It was there. Caldus Vaughan, Brother Sergeant, 4th Company, fell at Vorton's Gate in the year 327, M41, honored, remembered, entombed. I stared at my own name, carved into stone, and felt the creeping certainty that I was looking at my own grave. They brought me to the chapter's fortress monastery the next day, though I had no sense of a night passing, no rest or sleep to mark the boundary between one moment and the next. Time simply continued, unbroken, and I continued with it. The transport was a heavy-load Thunderhawk, its bay modified to accommodate Dreadnought chassis, and as I was mag-locked into position, I felt the engines ignite beneath me, felt the lurch of takeoff translated through shock absorbers and gyro stabilizers. The world beyond the hull became sensor readings, altitude markers, velocity indicators. I watched the monastery grow closer through Auspex returns, a fortress of stone and steel clinging to a mountainside, its spires reaching toward a sky I could no longer see with human eyes. We descended into a hangar bay large enough to house a company of tanks, and as the ramp lowered, I caught my first glimpse of the other warriors waiting to greet me. They were brothers I had known, men I had fought beside, officers I had served under. But they looked at me differently now, not with the camaraderie of equals, but with the reverent distance afforded to relics. They saluted, fists to chests, and spoke words of honor and welcome, but none of them met what I understood to be my gaze. They looked at the chassis, the heraldry, the weapons. They looked at the monument, not at me. Captain Theron approached, his Terminator armor painted in the deep crimson of the Fourth Company, his face a mask of controlled emotion. He had been my superior officer, my commander, my friend. We had breached Xeno's fortresses together, stood shield to shield in boarding actions, shared the silence of long campaigns. Now he stood before me and spoke as though addressing a statue. "Brother Sergeant Vaughn," he said, his voice carrying the formal weight of ceremony. "The Fourth Company honors your return. Your deeds at Vortan's Gate will be sung for generations. Your sacrifice has purchased victory. Your continued service will be a beacon to all who follow." I wanted to tell him that I felt no sense of victory, that sacrifice implied an ending and I had been granted none, that service without death was a sentence without commutation. Instead, I said what was expected. "I am honored to continue my duty, Captain. The Emperor protects." "The Emperor protects," he echoed, and the words rang hollow in my vox grill, stripped of the warmth that human speech could carry. They led me through corridors I had walked 1,000 times, but everything had changed. Doorways that had once seemed grand now scraped against my shoulders, ceilings that had soared now pressed close. The fortress had not shrunk. I had grown, swollen into this mechanical vastness, and the world of men had become a place I no longer fit. I moved carefully, aware that a careless gesture could crush stone, that my weight could crack ancient floors, that I was now as much a danger to my own brothers as I was to the enemy. The armory had been modified to house me. A chamber once used for storing land speeders had been converted into a sanctum for the chapter's dreadnoughts, its walls lined with maintenance cradles, its floor reinforced with ferrocrete, its ceiling hung with servo arms and maglifts. 3 other dreadnoughts stood in their alcoves, silent, unmoving, locked in the dreamless stasis that awaited all of us between deployments. I recognized their heraldry. Brother Ancient Maccas, interred 4 centuries prior, Venerable Dran, who had walked for 600 years, and Throne-blessed Kairos, oldest of all, a warrior from the chapter's founding who had not spoken in living memory, who existed now only as a legend wrapped in steel. I was placed in the 4th alcove, the newest, the least honored. The tech priests connected me to the maintenance cradle, and I felt the intrusion of diagnostic probes, the cold touch of data uplinks threading into my sarcophagus systems. They spoke in Binharik Kant, their voices a rapid staccato of machine language, and I understood perhaps one word in 5: efficiency, sanctity, communion, silence. When they finished, they withdrew, and I was left alone in the armory with the other dreadnoughts, surrounded by the machinery of war and the stillness of the forgotten. Hours passed. Days. I could not tell. I stood in my cradle, mag locked upright, systems cycled to minimal function, and I waited. There was nothing else to do, no duties to perform, no watch to stand, no battle to prepare for. Just waiting. The armory was silent except for the low hum of power conduits and the occasional hiss of pressure regulators. I tried to think, to remember, to hold on to the shape of who I had been, but memory felt slippery, unreliable. I could recall the siege of Vortan's Gate in perfect tactical detail, the disposition of forces, the angle of the traitor advance, the exact moment when the plasma blast had struck me, but I could not remember the face of the apothecary who had recovered my gene seed. I could recite the entire litany of hate, but I could not recall the taste of the chapter's sacramental wine. The things that made me human were fading. The things that made me a warrior remained, sharp and undimmed. I wondered if that was intentional. The activation came without warning. One moment I was locked in the half-awareness of standby mode, my thoughts slow and distant, and the next I was fully awake. Systems surging to combat readiness, threat matrices lighting up across my Auspex feed. The armory's doors were grinding open, and tech priests were flooding in, moving with the urgent efficiency of men preparing for war. They disconnected me from the cradle, checked weapon systems, murmured rites of awakening over my hull. "Brother Sergeant Vaughan," one of them voxed, "you are called to battle. The 4th Company deploys to the hive world of Castria Prime. Orc incursion, heavy mechanized resistance, your strength is required." Battle. The word ignited something in me, a flicker of purpose, of recognition. This was what I was made for now. Not thought, not memory, not the slow erosion of self in the silence of waiting. This was the function for which I had been preserved. I stepped free of the cradle, actuators roaring to full power, and the armory shook with my movement. They armed me with blessed ammunition, fed the assault cannon's hoppers with sanctified shells, anointed my power fist with oils that hissed and smoked against the metal. They draped me in prayer scrolls and purity seals, turning me into a walking shrine, and then they led me to the embarkation deck where the rest of the 4th Company waited. I saw them assembled in their squads, tactical marines and assault marines and devastators, all arrayed in perfect formation, their armor freshly painted, their weapons gleaming. They looked so small. I had been one of them, had stood in those ranks, had known the weight of a bolter and the press of a shoulder guard against my own. Now I towered over them, twice their height, 10 times their mass, and when I walked among them, they parted like water, giving me space, treating me like a natural disaster that had chosen their side. Captain Theron addressed the company, his voice ringing across the deck. "Brothers, we go to war. The greenskin filth have infested Castria Prime, and the Imperium calls upon us to cleanse it. We will be the Emperor's wrath. We will be his vengeance. And we will show these Xenos what it means to face the Adeptus Astartes." The company roared its approval, fists raised, voices united in a wordless cry of devotion. I said nothing. I had no voice for war cries anymore, only the grinding of weapons systems and the hum of targeting matrices. The deployment to Castria Prime took 3 weeks in the warp, though I experienced it as a formless blur of non-time. I was kept in standby mode during transit, my systems reduced to minimal function, and I drifted in a state that was neither sleep nor waking. Occasionally, I would register the presence of tech priests performing maintenance, or the distant vibration of the ship's engines changing pitch, but mostly there was only the void, the absence, the emptiness that stretched on without end. When we made planetfall, I woke to the scream of atmospheric entry and the rattle of anti-aircraft fire. The Thunderhawk shuddered around me, its hull glowing red-hot from re-entry friction, and I felt every impact of flak rounds through the ship's structural feedback. My targeting systems were already active, painting threats through the hull, tracking the Orc gun emplacements below, calculating firing solutions before I had even touched ground. The pilot's Vox crackled with chatter, squad leaders confirming drop zones, tech marines reporting readiness, and beneath it all, the low growl of Captain Theron's voice issuing commands. The Thunderhawk's ramp dropped, and I saw Castria Prime for the first time. It was a world of smoke and fire, a hive city half-collapsed, its spires broken, its hab blocks burning. The sky was choked with ash, the air thick with the stench of promethium and burning flesh. Orcs swarmed through the ruins, their crude vehicles belching exhaust, their mobs surging forward in chaotic waves. And in the distance, rising above the hive's remains, I saw their war machines, gargants and stompers, towering engines of destruction painted in garish colors and bristling with guns. The ramp clanged against rubble, and I stepped down into the war. My weight crushed stone beneath my feet, each step a small earthquake. I strode forward, and the 4th Company followed, bolters roaring, chainswords revving, voices raised in hymns of battle. The Orcs saw me and charged, a green tide of muscle and fury, and I met them with the full weight of my existence. The assault cannon spun to life, a whirring shriek of mechanized death, and I opened fire. The world became muzzle flash and recoil, shell casings raining down in a brass storm, tracer rounds stitching lines of light through the smoke. Orcs exploded under the fusillade, their bodies torn apart, their war cries cut short. I advanced, implacable, unstoppable, the assault cannon a constant roar, and when they closed to melee range, I crushed them with my power fist, each blow pulverizing armor and bone and flesh into unrecognizable ruin. It was butchery. It was efficient. It was what I had been made for. The battle lasted 6 hours, though I experienced it as a single, unbroken moment of violence. There was no fatigue, no hesitation, no mercy. I killed until the orcs broke and ran, until the 4th Company secured the hive's western sector, until Captain Theron voxed the order to cease fire. And then I stood among the dead, my hull steaming, my assault cannon's barrels glowing red-hot, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief. Just the absence where emotion should have been. A tech priest approached to assess damage and perform field repairs, and as he worked, I looked down at the carnage I had wrought. Hundreds of orc corpses lay scattered across the rubble, their blood pooling in the broken streets, and I tried to feel something about it. Pride, perhaps, or disgust, or even the grim satisfaction of duty fulfilled. But there was only the silence, the cold, mechanical silence of a weapon that had done its job. We fought on Castria Prime for 47 days, though I was only awake for 16 of them. Between battles, they returned me to standby mode, locking me in the transport bay of the strike cruiser, and I would slip into that formless void, that absence of thought and sensation, waiting for the next activation. Each time I woke, it was to war. Each time, the pattern repeated. Deploy, fight, kill, withdraw. Deploy, fight, kill, withdraw. The battles blurred together. I could not distinguish one engagement from another except through tactical data, through after-action reports uploaded to my memory banks. I knew that I had destroyed 3 orc stompers, that I had held a breach against a mechanized assault for 4 hours, that I had been damaged 7 times and repaired each time by the tech priests. I knew these things as facts, as data points, but I could not remember them as experiences. They lacked the texture of memory, the weight of lived moments. It was as though I was watching my own life through a distant lens, observing but not participating. The other dreadnoughts did not speak to me. I tried, once, to vox Brother Ancient Machus during a lull between deployments, when we were both locked in the transport bay, waiting. I asked him how long he had served, how many battles he had fought, how he endured the silence between wars. His response was a burst of static, followed by a single sentence. Endure? There is only duty. And then he went silent, locked back into whatever inner stillness sustained him. I did not try again. When the campaign on Castria Prime ended, we returned to the fortress monastery, and I was placed back in my alcove in the armory, reconnected to the maintenance cradle, and left to wait. The tech priests performed their rites, the chapter celebrated its victory, and I stood motionless, locked in standby mode, drifting in the void. Time passed. I did not know how much. I woke once to find that the armory had been rearranged, that Brother Ancient Machus was no longer in his alcove, and when I inquired, a tech priest informed me that he had been destroyed in battle. I tried to feel sorrow, tried to mourn, but I had not known him, had barely spoken to him, and he had been less a brother than a piece of ancient machinery that happened to share my fate. I woke again to find that the chapter had repainted its heraldry, that the 4th Company now bore different honor marks, that Captain Theron had been promoted to chapter master and another had taken his place. How long had I been asleep? I asked, and the tech priest checked his records. 43 years, Brother Sergeant. 43 years. I had not aged a day. I had not changed. I had simply not existed, suspended in the timeless void of standby mode, and the world had continued without me. The realization settled over me like frost. I had been awake for perhaps a total of 30 days since my internment, spread across 4.5 decades. The rest had been silence, absence, the null space between activations. And if that pattern continued, if I spent months awake and decades asleep, then what did time even mean to me anymore? What was a century to a being who experienced it as a handful of scattered moments? I tried to imagine the shape of my future, if such a word even applied, and saw only an endless procession of brief awakenings punctuating vast gulfs of nothingness. I would wake, fight, sleep, wake, fight, sleep, over and over until the chassis failed, until some battle finally destroyed me, or until the Imperium itself crumbled and I was left standing in the ruins, waiting for an activation that would never come. The horror was not the violence. The horror was the waiting. They activated me again, and the cycle repeated. Another war, another world, another enemy. This time, it was Chaos cultists on a Forge world, and I waded through their ranks like a god of wrath, crushing their flesh-twisted bodies, burning their blasphemous shrines. I fought alongside brothers I did not recognize, in a company whose composition had entirely changed, and when the battle ended, I was returned to the armory and placed back into standby. I woke. I fought. I slept. Years passed. Decades. Each activation brought new faces, new enemies, new battlefields. The chapter's fortress changed, expanded, rebuilt itself after damages I had not witnessed. The Imperium shifted, new threats emerged, old ones returned, and I marched through it all like a monument brought to terrible life, animated by duty and nothing else. I tried to hold on to myself. I repeated my name in the silence, clinging to it like a lifeline. Caldus Vaughan, Brother Sergeant, 4th Company, born on the hive world of Morhen, recruited at age 12, elevated to the rank of Sergeant after the Cronus campaign, Caldus Vaughan. But the name felt increasingly abstract, a label attached to data, a designation rather than an identity. Who was Caldus Vaughan? A warrior, yes, a servant of the Emperor, certainly. But what else? What had he loved? What had he feared? What had made him laugh, or weep, or rage? I could not remember. The memories were there, somewhere, locked in the biological remains preserved within my sarcophagus, but I could not access them. The interface between my brain and the Dreadnought systems prioritized tactical data, combat efficiency, threat analysis. There was no neural pathway for nostalgia, no processing capacity wasted on sentiment. I was forgetting how to be human, and I was becoming very, very good at being a weapon. The chapter venerated me. That much became clear over the decades. I was no longer simply Brother Sergeant Vaughan. I had become Venerable Vaughan, then Ancient Vaughan, and finally, as the centuries crawled past, Throne Blessed Vaughan. My hull was adorned with new honors after every campaign, draped in chains and scrolls, painted with kill markings that numbered in the thousands. Tech priests sang hymns over my armor, and young initiates were brought to stand before me to hear the recitation of my deeds, to learn what it meant to serve beyond death. They called it an honor. They called it a blessing. I stood before them, silent and towering, and let them believe it. Because what else could I do? Tell them the truth. That I was hollow, that I had become a ghost haunting a machine, that every activation felt less like waking and more like being dragged back from a peace I could not quite reach. Tell them that I envied the dead, the brothers whose names were carved in stone and who were allowed to rest, who did not have to endure this endless half-existence. I said nothing. I let them venerate the monument. The wars continued. I fought orcs and tyrannids and traitor Astartes. I walked on worlds whose names I immediately forgot, killed enemies whose faces blurred into a single tapestry of violence. I was damaged, repaired, upgraded, sanctified. The assault cannon was replaced with a las cannon, then a plasma cannon, then back to an assault cannon when the chapter's artificers deemed it more suited to my combat role. My power fist was reforged 3 times, inscribed with new blessings, fitted with new targeting systems. I was maintained with the care afforded to a relic because that was what I had become. Not a warrior, a relic that occasionally fought. I began to lose track of time entirely. Subjective experience became meaningless when decades could pass in what felt like an eye blink. I would wake, fight a campaign that lasted weeks or months, return to standby, and wake again to find that a century had elapsed. The chapter's ranks turned over, new brothers replacing the fallen, and I could no longer keep track of who was who. Faces became interchangeable, names forgotten almost as soon as I heard them. Only the chapter itself remained constant, the institution larger and more enduring than any individual, and I clung to it because it was the only continuity I had left. But even that began to feel abstract. I was fighting for a chapter I barely recognized, on behalf of an Imperium I could no longer understand, in service to an emperor I had never seen and could only accept on faith. Everything had become distant, remote, like a story someone had told me long ago. The silence between battles grew heavier. In standby mode, I drifted in a state that was not quite sleep, not quite unconsciousness. It was a grey void, a liminal space where thought became slow and cyclical, looping back on itself. I would find myself repeating the same memory over and over, examining it from every angle until it lost all meaning and became just shapes, sounds, disconnected fragments. I remembered the siege of Vortan's Gate. I had relived it 10,000 times, watching the plasma blast strike me, feeling the heat, the searing agony, the moment when my body came apart. But the memory had been replayed so many times that it no longer felt real. It had become a recording, a simulation, something that had happened to someone else. I could observe it with perfect clarity and feel nothing. Was that even my memory anymore? Or had it been copied, archived, replayed so many times by the sarcophagus systems that it had been worn smooth, stripped of all emotional content? I could not tell. The boundary between memory and combat log had blurred beyond recognition. I began to suspect that much of what I remembered was not memory at all, but data, tactical recordings, after-action reports, sensor feeds from battles I had fought, uploaded and stored and replayed until they felt like lived experiences. How much of my past was real, and how much was simply information the machine had absorbed and presented to me as though it were mine? How much of me was left? I tried to find an answer and came up empty. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when I felt something close to emotion. A battle on a shrine world where I fought alongside sisters of battle, their voices raised in hymns as they charged into the enemy, and for a brief instant I remembered what faith felt like, what it meant to believe in something larger than yourself. The memory of that feeling lingered for days, precious and fragile, before it slipped away. A campaign against Dark Eldar raiders where I found a group of human captives huddled in a collapsed hab block, their eyes wide with terror. And when I spoke to reassure them, I heard my own voice reduced to a mechanical approximation of comfort, and I felt the ache of something lost. A siege where a young tech marine, barely a century old, worked through the night to repair my damaged leg actuator, and as he labored, he spoke to me of his homeworld, of the mountains he had climbed as a boy, of the dreams he had before he was recruited, and I listened, desperate for any connection to the world of the living, and when he finished and moved on, I felt the silence return, colder than before. These moments were rare. Mostly, there was only the war. I began to wonder if the war was all there had ever been, if Kaldus Vaughn had been nothing more than a collection of combat memories stitched together, a narrative constructed to give purpose to violence. Perhaps I had never been human at all. Perhaps I had always been this, a weapon dreaming of flesh, a machine hallucinating a past. The thought terrified me more than any enemy I had faced. I fought at the siege of Khalistan, and it was there that I began to understand the true shape of my existence. The siege lasted 18 months, a grinding war of attrition against a traitor legion that had fortified an entire hive city. The 4th Company was committed in full, supported by Imperial Guard regiments and Titan legions, and I was deployed to the front lines, tasked with breaking fortified positions that even tanks could not penetrate. I fought every day for 18 months. I was awake for every hour, every minute, locked in a state of constant combat readiness. The tech priests kept me functional through field repairs, patching damage as I sustained it, reloading weapons between engagements. I did not sleep. I did not rest. I simply fought, an endless procession of targets and firing solutions and tactical adjustments. By the end of the siege, I had killed more than 10,000 enemies. I had sustained catastrophic damage 17 times and been rebuilt each time. I had outlasted 3 different company captains, each one falling to enemy fire and being replaced. And when the siege finally ended, when the traitor forces broke and the 4th Company claimed victory, I was returned to the strike cruiser and placed into standby mode. I had been awake for 18 months. I slept for 200 years. When I woke, the chapter had changed so completely that I did not recognize it. The fortress monastery had been rebuilt in a new architectural style. The 4th Company bore heraldry I had never seen. The tech priests who maintained me spoke in a dialect of Binharik I struggled to parse. 200 years had passed in what felt, to me, like a single breath. I had experienced 18 months of war and 2 centuries of absence, and my subjective experience weighed them as equal. The siege felt recent, immediate, as though I had just stepped off the battlefield. The 200 years felt like nothing, a gap in existence, a void where time should have been but wasn't. I tried to reconcile this, to understand how I could be so utterly disconnected from the flow of time, and I realized that this was the true nature of my existence. I was not living through time. I was being activated at intervals, animated for brief periods of violence, then returned to storage. Time continued for everyone else, but for me, there was only the war, punctuated by nothingness. I was not immortal. I was frozen, locked in a perpetual present, while the universe aged around me. The realization was crushing. I had thought, in the beginning, that I would continue to live, to experience, to exist as I had before, only in a new form. But that was not what had happened. I had been reduced to a function, a subroutine executed only when needed. The Kuldus Vaughn, who had walked among his brothers, who had known camaraderie and purpose, who had experienced the slow accumulation of days and years, he was gone. What remained was a fragment, a shard of consciousness preserved in amber, animated only to kill. I tried to speak this truth to someone, anyone, but there was no one to speak to. The other dreadnoughts were locked in their own silences, ancient beyond my comprehension, and the living brothers treated me with such reverence that honest conversation was impossible. I was a monument, a saint, a relic. They venerated me, but they did not know me. I was utterly alone. The wars continued, and I fought them with the precision of a machine and the despair of a ghost. I walked across burning worlds and frozen moons, through the ruins of civilizations and the depths of space hulks. I killed in the Emperor's name, and I did so without hesitation, without mercy, because that was the only thing left that I could do. The war gave me purpose, however hollow. The war gave me context, however bleak. Without the war, there was only the silence, and the silence was unbearable. I began to fear the return to standby mode more than I feared any enemy. In battle, I was alive, or at least something approximating it. My systems ran at full capacity, my sensors drank in data, my weapons roared and thundered. I was present, engaged, real, but in standby, I dissolved, became less than a dream, less than a memory. I became potential energy, stored but not expressed, and the longer I remained in that state, the harder it was to remember that I had ever been anything else. I started to beg, in my own way, to be kept active. Between deployments, I would vox the tech priests, requesting additional duties, volunteer assignments, anything to delay the inevitable return to the armory. I offered to stand watch, to guard the fortress, to serve as a training aid for initiates. Anything to remain awake, to remain present. They refused, kindly but firmly. "You are too valuable to risk outside of combat, Ancient Vaughn," they would say. "Your systems require rest, to maintain operational integrity. The rites of dormancy are necessary. You will be activated when the chapter has need of you. And so I would be led back to my alcove, reconnected to the maintenance cradle, and put to sleep. Each time, I wondered if I would wake at all. Each time, I hoped, in some small and shameful corner of my mind, that I would not. The chapter celebrated its 10,000th year of service to the Imperium, and I was there, standing in the Great Hall alongside the other Dreadnoughts, as the chapter master recited the names of the honored dead. My name was among them, because in all ways that mattered, I was dead. I had fallen at Fortan's gate. I had been granted the Emperor's mercy. I had been allowed to serve beyond death. This was the story they told. This was the truth they believed. And I stood there, towering and silent, a monument to a lie. Because I had not been granted mercy. I had been denied rest. I had been sentenced to an existence that was neither life nor death, but something in between, something worse than either. I was a prisoner in a tomb that walked, a ghost bound to a machine, and the only release I would ever know was destruction so complete that not even the tech priests could resurrect me, and even that was not guaranteed. I had seen dreadnoughts rebuilt from wreckage that should have been beyond repair, their sarcophagi recovered from battlefields and reinterred in new chassis. I had seen warriors who had been destroyed return, again and again, dragged back from whatever peace they had found because the chapter deemed them too valuable to lose. There was no escape. There was only service, eternal and unending, until the heat death of the universe or the final failure of the Imperium, whichever came first. I tried to resign myself to this fate, to accept it as the other dreadnoughts seemed to have done, but I could not. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavier than any armor, and I carried it through every battle, every deployment, every moment of wakefulness. I was afraid. Not of the enemy, not of death. I was afraid of the silence, the endless dark between wars, the void that waited every time they put me to sleep. I was afraid that one day I would wake and find that I had forgotten everything, that Coldus Vaughn had finally dissolved entirely, and all that remained was the machine, running on instinct and programming, a hollow shell with no one inside. I was afraid that I was already there. The battle on Helica the Seventh was where everything finally crystallized. We were deployed to repel a Tyranid hive fleet, a swarm that had consumed 3 systems and was bearing down on an agri-world critical to the sector's food supply. The 4th Company fought alongside 2 other chapters, supported by Imperial Guard and Navy assets, and the battle was apocalyptic in scale. Billions of Tyranids, endless waves of claws and teeth and bioacid, crashing against our lines in a tide that seemed without end. I was deployed to anchor the center, to hold a narrow canyon pass that the Hive fleet was using as a primary invasion route. For 72 hours, I stood in that pass and killed everything that tried to cross it. The assault cannon never stopped firing, never cooled, its barrels glowing white-hot, and when the ammunition hoppers ran dry, tech priests sprinted forward under covering fire to reload me, and I continued. Tyranids swarmed over me, clawing at my armor, trying to tear through to the sarcophagus within. I crushed them with my power fist, shook them off, fired point blank into their masses. The ground became a carpet of bodies, and still they came, driven by the hive mind's hunger, and I killed them all. I killed for 72 hours without pause, and somewhere in the midst of that endless slaughter, I had a realization. I was not afraid. I was not angry. I was not sad. I felt nothing at all. The Tyranids were a problem to be solved, a tactical equation, and I solved it with the methodical efficiency of a weapon system. Each kill was a data point, each wave a calculation. I was not defending the Imperium, not protecting the agri-world's billions, not upholding the Emperor's will. I was simply executing my function, running the program I had been designed to run. I was no longer Coldus Vaughn. I was unyielding wrath, contemptor pattern dreadnought, serial number burned into the sarcophagus plating, a piece of equipment activated when needed. The man who had once inhabited this machine was gone, and I mourned him distantly, the way one might mourn a stranger whose name appeared in a casualty report. When the battle ended, when the Hive fleet was finally driven back and the agri-world declared secure, I was extracted from the Canyon Pass and returned to the strike cruiser. The tech priests marveled at the damage I had sustained, at the kill count tallied by my targeting systems, at the sheer volume of destruction I had wrought. They called me a hero. They called me a legend. They prepared me for another long sleep, another descent into the void, and as they connected the final uplinks, as my systems began to cycle down, I tried one last time to hold on to myself. Culdus Vaughn, Brother Sergeant, 4th Company, born on Morin, fell at Vorton's gate. The words felt hollow, meaningless, a prayer spoken by rote without belief. And then the silence took me, and I was gone. I do not know how long I slept that time. When I woke, the chapter informed me that I had been dormant for 370 years. 370 years. A span of time longer than most human civilizations, longer than some imperial institutions, compressed into what felt like a single instant of non-existence. I tried to process this, to comprehend the weight of it, and I could not. The numbers were too large, the gulf too vast. I had missed centuries, entire eras, ages of history, and it felt like nothing. The fortress monastery had changed again. The 4th Company bore new honors, new scars. There were brothers who had been born, recruited, elevated to command, and died of old age in the time I had been asleep, and I had not known any of them. I was a stranger in my own chapter. I was a relic from an age so distant that even the records were fragmentary. And when they deployed me to war again, I fought with the same precision, the same efficiency, the same utter absence of feeling. The enemy was irrelevant. The cause was irrelevant. Only the war mattered, because the war was the only thing that kept me awake, the only thing that proved I still existed in some form. I fought on a forge world overrun by heretics, and I burned them all. I fought on a space hulk infested with genestealers, and I purged them all. I fought on a demon world where reality itself was suspect, and I destroyed everything that moved. And between each battle, I returned to the silence, the void, the absence. Years passed, decades, centuries. I lost count. The chapter celebrated its 15,000th year, and I was there, the oldest of the Dreadnoughts now, the last link to the chapter's ancient past. They spoke of me in legends, in songs, in stories told to initiates. They said I had fought in the time of apostasy, that I had stood beside saints, that I had witnessed the dawn of the age of the Imperium. I remembered none of it. My memory had become a patchwork of battle logs and tactical data, stitched together into a narrative that bore only passing resemblance to lived experience. I could recite every engagement I had fought, every enemy I had killed, every world I had walked upon, but I could not tell you what any of it had felt like. I was a library of war, catalogued and indexed, but the person who had lived through those wars was gone. All that remained was the record. I began to understand, finally, what the other dreadnoughts had known all along. This was not survival. This was preservation. We were not warriors anymore. We were archives, repositories of experience and skill, maintained and activated only when the knowledge we contained was deemed valuable. The chapter did not keep us alive out of love or loyalty or honor. It kept us because we were useful, because a dreadnought represented an investment of resources and tradition too valuable to discard. We were tools, sacred tools, blessed tools, venerated tools, but tools nonetheless. And like all tools, we would be used until we broke. The realization brought a strange kind of peace. If I was a tool, then I did not need to mourn the loss of humanity. I did not need to grieve for Culdus Vaughn, because Culdus Vaughn had never been the point. The point was the function, the purpose, the role I served. And as long as I could serve, as long as the machine remained operational, then I was fulfilling my purpose. It was a cold comfort, but it was the only comfort I had. The siege of Crindle was my last battle, though I did not know it at the time. We were deployed against a chaos warband that had fortified a shrine world, desecrating its temples and raising monuments to the dark gods. The Fourth Company led the assault, supported by Sisters of Battle and Imperial Guard, and I was tasked with breaching the primary gate, a massive adamantium barrier inscribed with wards and blasphemies. I walked through a storm of fire to reach it, shrugging off Lascanon strikes and melter blasts, my shields flaring, my armor scorched but holding. I reached the gate and drove my power fist into it, again and again, each blow shattering stone and metal, until the barrier crumbled and the way was open. The Fourth Company poured through, and I followed, crushing heretics beneath my feet, burning them with my weapons. The battle was brutal, close quarters, the kind of fighting where even a Dreadnought's size became a liability. I was hit from all sides, concentrated fire from heavy weapons, chain axes biting into my leg actuators, grenades detonating against my hull. I ignored it all and pressed forward. I reached the shrine at the heart of the complex, a vast cathedral corrupted into something obscene, its walls dripping with blood, its altar crowned with skulls. And there, waiting for me, was a chaos sorcerer, his armor writhing with demonic energy, his eyes burning with malevolent light. He spoke, his voice resonant with dark power. "Ancient One, why do you serve the corpse god? He has left you to rot in that shell, denied you death, denied you peace. Join us, and I will grant you the release you crave." I did not answer. I fired. The plasma cannon roared, and the sorcerer dissolved in a flash of superheated energy. The shrine collapsed, its supports shattered by the blast, and I stood in the ruins as the Fourth Company secured the perimeter. It was a clean kill, a decisive victory. I felt nothing. As I turned to withdraw, my systems registered a catastrophic failure in my reactor core. Damage from the siege had compromised the containment field, and a cascade failure was imminent. I had perhaps 30 seconds before the reactor went critical. I voxed the Fourth Company, ordered them to evacuate the shrine, and I walked deeper into the ruins, as far from my brothers as I could manage. The reactor's warnings grew more urgent, alarms screaming through my sensorium, and I stopped in the center of the collapsed cathedral, surrounded by rubble and fire. I thought, in those final moments, that I should feel fear or regret or sorrow, but there was only relief. Finally, after all these centuries, after all these wars, I would be allowed to stop. The reactor detonated, and the world became light and heat and silence. I woke in the armory, reconnected to a new chassis, and the tech priest informed me that my sarcophagus had been recovered from the wreckage and transferred to a new contemptor frame. The chapter deemed me too valuable to lose. They had rebuilt me. They had denied me even that final escape. I stood in my alcove, listening to the tech priest recite the blessings, and I understood, finally and completely, the true horror of my existence. I was a dreadnought, a tomb that walked, a ghost bound to a machine, denied the mercy of death, denied the peace of silence. I would wake and fight and sleep, over and over, until the Imperium itself crumbled into dust, and perhaps even beyond that. There was no escape, no end, no release. Only service, eternal, unending, absolute. And they called it an honor. They called it a blessing. I said nothing. I let them believe it, because what else was there to say? The silence took me again, and I descended into the void, and I waited for the next war, the next activation, the next brief moment of existence punctuating the endless dark. And in that darkness, I finally understood the question I had been avoiding for centuries. Just how terrifying is a dreadnought? Not to the enemy, to the warrior inside. The answer is simple, and it is absolute. We are the most terrifying thing the Imperium has ever created, not because of what we can do, but because of what we have become. We are the dead who cannot rest, the living who cannot die. We are the price of eternal service, the cost of the Emperor's vision. We are monuments to a single, terrible truth, that in the Imperium, even death is not the end, and mercy is a lie we tell ourselves to endure. I am Caldus Vaughn. I am unyielding wrath. I am a Dreadnought, and I will walk until the stars grow cold, until the Imperium falls, until there is nothing left to fight and nothing left to fight for. Because I have no choice. Because this is the honor they gave me, and I will carry it forever in the silence between wars.